those of you who think that health care is a human right, or that you're entitled to things like food, housing, cell phones, education, student loan forgiveness, or anything else, I have just one question for you. Why are your bills my responsibility? For many of you, it comes as quite a shock that I would even ask such a question. I'm sure this is probably the first time you've ever heard it before, and it's something that you've never thought about. So I'll ask again, and I want you to seriously consider it, without taking it personally, and without any sense of malice on my part. Why are your bills my responsibility? Do you even realize what it is that you're asking when you push for programs like that? What the downstream consequences would be? I know you think of yourself as a good and honest person, who is doing their best to get by in this dark and dangerous world with little help from others. I know that you have needs, and those needs are valid. But do you understand that nothing in this world is truly free? That there is no such thing as a free lunch? That ultimately, someone has to pay for it. And in asking the government to provide those things to you, you are in fact participating in a system of institutionalized violence. That you're being given tainted fruit and blood money. I know it doesn't immediately feel like it. You've been taught otherwise. You've been told by pretty much everyone around you that the true evil is to deny people such programs. That if it even saves just one life, it's worth it. But this is important. My question is not without purpose, and countless lives depend upon the answer. So please, take a moment to really stop and ask yourself at some point, why are your bills my responsibility? And by my in this case, I don't just mean me personally, so much as the generic taxpayer. People who work hard, who often can barely get by as it is, many of whom are sick or have families to feed. People who have enough trouble paying their own bills, let alone someone else's. If you take a second to look around, I'm sure you've probably noticed how the honorable and industrious among us often find ourselves having to take care of those who don't do much of anything, and who can't even take care of themselves, let alone their friends, family, or fellow countrymen. To some extent, that includes you as well. If you pay taxes, you are paying other people's bills when you have a hard enough time with your own. Does that make sense to you? Does that seem fair to you? Does that seem virtuous and compassionate to you? You might say that we have a social and ethical responsibility to help others, to which I would wholeheartedly agree. It's good and moral and virtuous to help other people, to give without hope of reward. Every world religion preaches selflessness and generosity as a core tenet. However, when it comes to entitlement programs, to any forms of welfare, be they social, corporate, or otherwise, if you're receiving money, products, or services from the government, you are ultimately receiving stolen goods. No matter what those benefits are, or who the recipient is, be it your grandmother, a single mother, a homeless person, a sick child, a corporate hedge fund, or CEO even. It's not an either-or. The same principle applies. Whatever noble ends there are in the intention, that virtue, that desire to rescue people, becomes tainted by corrupt and evil means. In terms of the mechanics, it's no different than cashing a check from a mafia racket, of having the mob pay your medical bills and build your infrastructure on the backs of stolen money, of blood money. Would you say that the mafia are upstanding citizens if they donated $1 million to charity and built schools for orphans, knowing that all their money came as the result of threatening people with violence, from breaking kneecaps, from burning down businesses, and from extorting the elderly and the vulnerable with high-interest loans that they could never hope to repay? Because that's ultimately how the government operates behind the scenes. Much like with factory farming, people have become detached from the source of what sustains them. They've become detached from the source of their welfare benefits. They think that the government provides all these things for free, as if they were fruits on the vine, just growing from the ground, waiting to be plucked and eaten, with no cost or negative consequences. If that were truly the case, then yeah, it would take a truly cold-hearted evil bastard to stop you from eating them. If it were truly free, I'd be in favor of it. But it's not, so I'm not. Unlike you and me, the government has nothing of its own. It doesn't produce anything. All it has are those things it takes from us, often through coercive means. Because who in their right mind would willingly donate anything to a bloated, bureaucratic, wasteful, corrupt system of lying, crooked, prepaid politicians if they didn't have to, right? What free and moral and honest and compassionate person would do that when they could instead just cut out the middleman and donate their surplus directly to someone in need? As George Washington once said, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, a troublesome servant, and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. Government is a monopoly on the use of force. We all understand this. Whatever the government has, it's seized and taken at the barrel of a gun. A glorified armed robbery, whose inner workings are deliberately and carefully concealed. Don't think so? Try not paying your taxes and see what happens. After all the letters and phone calls, armed men will come to haul you off before an administrative tribunal where few have the resources to survive, and where your full rights aren't even respected. And if you try to resist this extortion, if you try to defend yourself and your hard-earned property, you'll be shot and made an example of. That's what the government is at the end of the day. And all the smiling faces and think of the children slogans, and the ads telling you how entitled you are to everything, and how it's your duty as a citizen to pay your fair share. It's all just propaganda. If you have a job, if you volunteer your time, if you take care of your family, your friends, and your neighbors, then you are already paying your fair share and contributing to society. Those who profit from the welfare state need to brainwash you and tug at your heartstrings in order to sell this con, to guilt you into compliance so they don't have to use force, because violence is ugly and messy and comes with a lot more risks. If they can instead dupe you into going along with it, they have plausible deniability to claim that everything is free and fair and above board. But make no mistake, these people are no different than a common back-alley mugger. That's not to say that everyone who receives welfare is knowingly a bad person. I'm sure many of you haven't thought about this in those terms, and you're just doing what you can to survive, because you have needs, and you're just looking for some help. That the myriad pressures of life compel you not to ask too many questions about where the money is coming from. When you're starving, you don't care if what you're eating is rotten trash. Your only thought is on your immediate survival. That's perfectly understandable and relatable. But ultimately, it's unsustainable. Either we will tighten our belts in the short term and wean ourselves off this drug of welfare, or else we'll be rudely awakened by a hard crash in the long term, when our financial system and our economy suddenly and rapidly crumble under the weight of crippling debt. When the money runs out, and you're right back here anyway, making the same hard choices, only far less prepared. Society cannot allow this racket to continue. And that's what this is. Government is a racket. I'm simply cutting to the chase and pulling back the curtain. I'm showing you how the sausage gets made. When I say that taxation is theft and extortion and violence, when I tell you that welfare is blood money, when I say that government is naked force, I'm speaking in shorthand, alluding to this broader context. Does that disgust you? Do you feel good knowing where your meals are coming from? That it's on the backs of other people just like you with families to feed? People being fleeced for milk and meat by a soulless, uncaring machine that will grind you up and spit you out without conscience or remorse. That they must suffer for you to survive. Does that make you feel angry, guilty, or ashamed to learn that you are unwittingly participating in cycles of violence that lead to more suffering? Why are your bills their responsibility? And moreover, why are theirs yours? It's a two-way street. You don't owe them anything, nor do they owe you. When it comes to entitlements, the truth is this. You are entitled to nothing. You are entitled to nothing. People often resist this line of reasoning, claiming that taxes are the price we pay for living in a civilized society, as though taxes were the only way to contribute. Would you consider that a sad state of affairs, that the only way someone can give back is to be compelled to do so through force and fraud? Wouldn't it be better for everyone if they chose that for themselves? Again, no one pays taxes voluntarily. Some of you think you do. You proclaim how happy you are to pay them as part of your civic duty, feeling virtuous at doing your part to help your fellow man. But ask yourself this. If the government stopped collecting taxes tomorrow and simply gave you the option of donating however much you wanted, would you still be cutting them a check? I doubt it. Because again, most of you are currently struggling just to get by, and so you'll save whatever you can for a rainy day and spend it on those things you want or need or care about before giving it away. I'd wager the government is probably the last person you'd trust with extra money, given how much they've already racked up in debt. For those who claim you're happy to pay your taxes, why do you need the government to force you to do it? That doesn't sound virtuous to me. That doesn't sound like you're enthusiastic about it. Rather, it sounds like you do it begrudgingly because you have to, and would only do it if everyone else was as well, since otherwise it's a raw deal from your end. That'd make you a sucker and a chump if they weren't all playing by the same rules, right? Again, try stopping payment and see what happens. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's not a conscious decision that you're making. You just rationalize after the fact to make yourself feel better, and to forget about how awful this system really is. You would rather try and find a silver lining if one exists, because change is hard, and opposing this system is an overwhelming task that is beyond the ability of any individual to influence. But deep down, in your heart of hearts, you know you'd rather hold on to your paycheck. Deep down, we all know, and there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, that sounds like the more honest and virtuous path. There are those who claim that, without such benefits, many people would suffer and die. And I don't doubt that's true in a mechanical sense. I'm sure it's perfectly true on paper. But in practice, such extortion can't be tolerated, so we're left with the question of what to do about those people. Again, if you're so good and noble, and care about them, then why do you need to be forced at gunpoint to help? Surely there's something you can do. Some small act of random kindness? Wouldn't a virtuous person take it upon themselves to donate voluntarily? Isn't that where goodness comes from? The fact that you did something to help others when no one was watching, and when you weren't required to? You will then say, but we don't have extra money to spare. And I agree. The government is taking it from you by force, and that is why you have nothing to give. Or maybe you don't actually care as much as you proclaim, such that you do the bitter work yourself. Maybe it's easier to offload responsibility onto someone else. Maybe the silver lining in this system of corruption is that you can disguise your selfishness, masking it as generosity, while signaling your virtue, and then go home and tell yourself you're a good person, and that it wasn't really your choice to be in this position, that the government forced you to do it. You're a victim after all. Then you get to use this as justification to ask for benefits yourself, and keep this vicious cycle going, never really striking at the true root cause of the problem. That sounds like a terrible deal, a horrible game that isn't worth playing. Wouldn't it instead make more sense for each person to keep what they make, to pull their own weight, and then, if they have extra left over, turn to those closest to them and work outward from there? If your needs are taken care of, then starting with your immediate friends and family or your local community, keeping it at a level where you can build a relationship with the person you're helping, to follow up and ensure they get the assistance they need, and that those who are slacking off are held to account. Does that seem more efficient, more moral, more compassionate, more meaningful, less wasteful and less corrupt to you? Why does a person in New York have to pay the bills of those living in California? Why do the people in Oregon have to forgive the student loan debt of Texans? Why should people in Montana be forced to supplement the health care of those living in Florida? Why are we entangling all these things, pushing money around, pouring so much down the drain in the process, when you can just help the person living down the street and be far more effective at it? The answer is simple. This system remains in place because many of your fellow citizens don't actually care about you at all the way they claim. They'll say so on paper and broadcast their virtue aloud, but by their actions they shall be known, and their actions reflect only that they are lazy, selfish, spoiled, entitled, and are just outsourcing violence because they're too weak and cowardly to point the gun at you themselves, to look you in the eye when they're robbing you blind, because that would make it personal, and they'd have to live with the guilt and shame of what they're doing. They'd have to confront a prey who'd actually fight back. It's not a social safety net. It's a shakedown, a con, a Ponzi scheme. A way for those who contribute nothing to society to turn around and funnel wealth to themselves and redistribute it away from those that do. It's a way for the have-nots and the have-too-muches to take what little you have. It's a way for them to rob you of what's yours. Ask yourself how much of your money is going to pay for people like that. These vile, ungrateful, blood-sucking leeches. These corporate and social welfare whores. And how much longer are you going to put up with it? How much longer are you going to let them walk all over you? To exploit you? To threaten you with covert acts of violence behind a mask before you stand up for yourself? Before you slam on the brakes and put an end to this entire extortion racket? How many of you right now are paying thousands in taxes every year and getting nothing for it? How many of you are paying taxes, yet you still have to go on the dole and claim benefits and ask for handouts? Why are you wasting time shelling out money just to have it handed right back to you at 80 cents on the dollar? That money is yours. You worked for it. You earned it, you own it. Every last penny of it. And no one on God's green earth has the right to tell you otherwise, or to take it from you without your consent. If you wish to be generous with what you have, that is your business. That is between you and your God, and by your actions, you too shall be known. But right now, I bet those of you listening to this would love nothing more than to take home an extra 30%, 40%, 50% more income in order to fund your own way, to pay your bills, to take a trip, to save up towards your retirement, to put your kids through school, to give back to your community. And here's the part that no one ever tells you. You can have it. Today. The money is already there. You've already made it through the sweat of your brow. It's just been stolen from you by a bunch of lazy, greedy thugs and the conniving politicians who do their bidding. By lying vipers who prey upon your compassion, who exploit you daily but won't lift a finger to help themselves, let alone anyone else. Certainly least of all you. It's your money. You deserve to keep it. All of it. 100%. Tell Congress you've had enough of this charade and you want your money back. Let your voices be heard. Tell them you know how best to spend your money and to take care of yourself and those around you. That you don't need them to look after the poor, the sick, the old, the young, the disabled, the illiterate, the homeless, the dispossessed. You're more than capable of doing that yourself. That you're sick of their lies and their petty theft. You want your money back. You'll build the roads, the schools, the hospitals yourself, or hire those who can. You'll donate to the Red Cross, to Greenpeace, and to funding online education. You'll start your own sustainable business and volunteer at the local chapter for environmentalism or equality or the arts or whatever cause you care about. And I mean really care about. Those things that you'll pay out of pocket for because you're passionate about them, because you have to have them, and because you feel that society and humanity can't do without them. Things for which you're willing to step up and take action and to be counted. That you'll actually get out of your chair and leave the house to fix, not this phony virtue signaling that comes from forced association and game theory. That is what true compassion looks like. That is what real generosity looks like. You'll make real connections and save real lives and do it all honestly and nobly. Because that's what we do, and that's who we are, and the world will be better for it. That is how we will make America greater than ever, and build a future of freedom for all. We can't dismantle this corrupt system overnight. Not without creating worse problems in the short term, since many will fight us to the death in clinging to their spoils and to their ill-gotten gains. They will fight to protect all that extortive blood money and to keep it flowing until the sewers scab over and we all drown like vermin together. And I certainly understand their motivations for doing so. I understand them all too well at a personal level, for I was once in their shoes. I felt the pangs of hunger and privation, of not knowing where your next meal will come from, or whether your loved ones will die for lack of liquidity, of having your lights and your heat shut off, and the specter of death looming over you because you couldn't pay the rent for the 6th month in a row, of only being able to take a crappy job within walking distance, because you can't even bootstrap yourself to buy a bicycle, let alone a car needed to find a better one, since every extra dollar has to go towards keeping those you care about alive for one more day. I understand the shame, the humiliation, the anger, and the fear that such a life of poverty inevitably breeds. The mistrust and the miserliness. The dark nightmares that haunt your waking life of 1,001 terrible things you'd consider doing, all of which go against the principles that you consider a good and honest person to hold, but which you'd risk doing if it meant putting another $100 in your pocket. Of knowing that the only thing holding you back is the fear of getting caught, and how all that hard work would have been for nothing. How everyone you love would die if you got hauled off to jail for doing something stupid. And feeling so pathetic, as it seems like everyone else around you can do it and get away with it. I know those feelings all too well. As much as I can relate to what you're going through right now, I also have the clarity of mind to recognize that society cannot tolerate those things. It cannot allow you to give in to the darkest corners of your mind and to act upon those all-too-human impulses without us devolving into ever-spiraling chaos and dragging us down to the lowest common denominator. I know that the only way we get out of this is to help build each other up and to rise together in virtue. For that to happen, the welfare state must die. We must stab it through the heart with prejudice and malice aforethought. But we won't throw anyone to the wolves in order to do it. No one will be kicked out onto the streets or made to feel like I'm taking food from their mouths. No one will have to watch Grandma die sick and penniless on the streets. No one wants that. We all agree on the problem. We just disagree on what we think is the optimal solution. So please, stop demonizing one another. Stop questioning the motives of those who disagree with you politically, and let's work to fix this as one unified force for good. There is a way to deal with all of these issues, to have the best of both worlds in the long term. But in the short term, it's essential that we come together in one voice and express our overwhelming anger, our righteous fury, at this institutional theft that has been allowed to go unchecked for so long. It's time to take back the fruits of our labor and say to the petty thieves that walk among us, you are entitled to nothing. Enough is enough already. This house of cards is coming down once and for all.